Hi guys, I'm coming to you today with a surprisingly large book haul for the month of May. Surprising for me anyway, because I had resolved to be a bit more frugal in the month of May and not buy too many books, and I didn't. But I found a lot of attractive books in giveaway boxes and the little free library this month. People did a lot of spring cleaning during lockdown, or if they are total assholes without the slightest consideration for their neighbors and their neighbors' mental well-being, they put them through weeks and weeks of complete renovation. But anyway, lots of books made it into giveaway boxes and little free libraries, lots of interesting, attractive books, and I got me some. So let's start with those books, with the ones that I got for free. First we have A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. I've always been sort of cautiously interested in this book just because it was such a big book and it won the Pulitzer Prize, but I'm not sure if it is really my thing. It tells the stories of 12 people, or it tells stories from the points of view of 12 people who are connected because apparently they all know or they've all had encounters with the two main characters, who are the CEO of a record label and his female assistant. Thematically and setting-wise, this is set mainly, I think, in New York and San Francisco. Thematically and setting-wise, this isn't really my thing, and I'm just interested in it because it is such a big name. But I figured I can always put it back into the little free library at any point, so there's no harm in just taking it and giving it a try. And from the same giveaway box, I got Spider's Web by Agatha Christie. This is a standalone by Agatha Christie. The detective in the story is the wife of a Foreign Office diplomat who one day finds a body in her drawing room. But this isn't actually an original novel by Agatha Christie. It is originally a play, and it was adapted into a novel by Charles Osborne. So I'm curious to see how this reads, and if it reads as if Agatha Christie had written it, or if Charles Osborne did his own thing with it style-wise. And from a different giveaway box has come Die Nacht von Lissabon, The Night in Lisbon in the English translation, by Erich Maria Remarque. I had never heard of this book before and just took it because of its author, who, as you will know, is the author of All Quiet on the Western Front. In this book, a man is trying to flee from Europe in 1940 or 1942. He has made it to Lisbon and is now trying to get passage on a ship to America. And he meets a second refugee who offers him a ticket on the condition that he will listen to his story, which he is going to tell him in one night in Lisbon, and which apparently has a love story in its center. I guess the author is the biggest selling point for this book for me, and I'm sure for lots of others. I think it's the same in the case of my next two books, which both came from the Little Free Library. The first is the Prague Cemetery by Umberto Eco. This is the German translation of the Italian original Il Cimitero di Praga, and it was translated by Burkhard Kröber. I'm going to read you the blurb of the English edition because otherwise I have no idea how to phrase this in English. 19th century Europe, from Turin to Prague to Paris, abounds with the ghastly and the mysterious. Conspiracies rule history, Jesuits plot against Freemasons, Italian Republicans strangle priests with their own intestines, French criminals plan bombings by day and celebrate black masses at night. Every nation has its own secret service perpetrating forgeries, plots, and massacres. From the unification of Italy to the Paris Commune to the Dreyfus Affair to the protocols of the Elders of Zion, Europe is in tumult and everyone needs a scapegoat. But what if behind all of these conspiracies, both real and imagined, lay one lone man? What if that evil genius created its most infamous document? I think the document in question are the protocols of the Elders of Zion, but I'm not sure. Haven't read it yet. I've only ever read one Umberto Eco before, The Name of the Rose, of course, and some of his theoretical texts, but only that one novel, and I've always wanted to read more. I actually own copies of Foucault's Pendulum, the Foucault Pendulum, not sure how it's called in the English translation, and of Baudolino, but this one sounds so much more fast-paced, and I've always been drawn to this more than to those other ones that I've owned for longer. So hopefully this is going to pave my way back into Umberto Eco's work. And last but not least, das Glasperlenspiel, the glass bead game by Hermann Hesse. So far I've read Siddhartha and Damian by Hermann Hesse, and I've been interested in this one for a while, and it was always going to be my third Hermann Hesse book. But I've also felt, after reading those first two books, that maybe now I am over Hermann Hesse, and I wasn't really sure if this was going to be worth my money, time, and effort. So I never bought a copy, but I've always been casually interested in it. And now I found a copy in this beautiful Surkamp edition in the Little Free Library, and I am quite happy about it. I can't promise that I will read it very soon, though. I then bought a handful of used books in an online secondhand bookshop. I've been looking for some time for short story collections that I might like. I usually get along best with short stories from the science fiction or fantasy genres, because what I want from a short story is that it explores one very precise thought or idea, and in my experience it's SFF short stories that do this best and most enthusiastically. But I wasn't really in the mood for straight up genre fiction, so I made a compromise and bought stories that are set in the real world and in contemporary times, but which have a distinctly weird, wonderful, or magical element. So my first collection is Ficciones by Jorge Borges. This is a collection of 17 stories that were all published in the 1940s. And if the first story is anything to go by, these are indeed very weird. And my second collection is Diving Bells by Lucy Wood. This is Lucy Wood's first short story collection. Her more recent one is called The Sing of the Shore. The blurb tells me that these stories are all set on the Cornish coast or on the Cornish moors, and that they draw from Cornish folklore. This sounds fascinating, and it's also beautifully designed, I think. I then bought Morvern Callar by Ellen Warner. This is the story of a 21-year-old woman who lives in a remote coastal town in the Scottish Highlands, where she works in the local supermarket and doesn't really have a future. And then one morning she wakes up to find her boyfriend dead on the floor. I think he has committed suicide, but in any case it sets off something in her, and I think she goes on a partying and clubbing spree through half of Europe, but I'm not really sure. In any case, it does set something off in her. This is, according to the cover, this has been made into a movie and won the Somerset Maugham Award, but I had never heard of it until about a month ago. I had heard of The Sopranos by the same author. This is the story of a bunch of Catholic schoolgirls, also in Scotland, who go to either Edinburgh or Glasgow for a singing competition, a choir competition or something. And this is apparently one of those instances in which a group of students who lead a sheltered but also repressed and boring life in a small town come to the big city with all its opportunities for pub crawling, clubbing, and body piercing, according to the blurb, and it completely escalates. This is set in the 1990s, and it might not have aged well, but it does sound like a lot of fun, I think. I also bought another novel by Andrew Greig, In Another Light. Andrew Greig wrote one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time. It's called At the Loch of the Green Corrie, and it is a mixture of nature and place writing and memoir. And last month, no, actually, still this month, I read my first novel by him, which was The Return of John McNabb, which I'm going to talk about shortly in a wrap up. And I liked it quite a lot, especially the writing style, so I bought another one. This one is set partly on Orkney, partly in Malaya, as it was called in the 1930s, because it is about a man from Scotland and his father who ran a maternity hospital in the colony of Malaya. Not quite sure what to expect from this one, but it is Andrew Greig, so I'm interested. And the last secondhand book that I bought was The Rarest of the Rare by Diane Ackerman. Diane Ackerman is a renowned nature writer. I have several times now sung the praises of The Moon by Waylight by her, which is a collection of essays about 4 species of animals and their habitats. Diane Ackerman is her background is in humanities, but she has field experience because she accompanied and talked to biologists and conservationists a lot. This book is also a collection of essays about rare and vanishing animals. They might even have vanished in the meantime. This was published in 1995, so I think the probability is high that some species that are mentioned in this book have already vanished, but it is not just about the animals, but also specifically about their habitats. Diane Ackerman writes beautifully, and I'm sure this book will be a treat. I then bought a very few books new, and the first of these is also about animals and extinction and conservation. It is Curlew Moon by Mary Colwell. This book is about a journey that Mary Colwell took through the British Isles, or at least Ireland, England, and Wales, where she followed the curlew for one nesting season and visited different nesting sites or former nesting sites of the curlew, and talked to and gave talks to the locals and local conservation groups. I have already read this book, and I was going to wrap it up in a recent nonfiction wrap up weeks ago, but I'm sort of waiting to read a nonfiction book that I like. My recent nonfiction hasn't been all that successful, and I don't want that wrap up to be so very negative. Spoiler for Curlew Moon, I'm sorry. I'm sure Diane Ackerman would do the trick, so I should just go ahead and read her, I guess. And finally, I bought a couple of books from the German publisher Reclam. They publish very affordable editions of mostly classics, but in recent decades they have branched out and they now publish also contemporary texts, especially if they are on school curriculums, but also nonfiction, and not just commentary on classical texts, but also all kinds of nonfiction books. This year, for instance, is a book about the Parthenon by Mary Bead. And these books are all super cheap, and I recently remembered that they also publish foreign books in their original language, so I bought 3 Spanish books. Bodas de Sangre by Federico Garcia Lorca, this is a play, a tragedy, which is a sort of a Romeo and Juliet story in which a young couple elopes on the eve of the wedding of the woman, which would have been with another man. This is very much about family structures and the way these big families worked in the south of Spain in Garcia Lorca's time. And I also bought another play, a very different one, La Muerte y la Doncella by Ariel Dorfman. This is Death and the Maiden in English, and you might be familiar with the movie which came out in 1994. And this play is a reckoning with the atrocities that were committed in Chile during the coup d'etat in 1969 and on September 11th, 1969, and its aftermath. And by the way, it is a great source of frustration to me that there is no good equivalent in English to the German word Aufarbeitung, which we use for this sort of reckoning, but which doesn't come with the associations of revenge or at least justice in the word reckoning, which is more neutral. Anyhow. And the third Spanish reclam booklet is Explico algunas cosas by Pablo Neruda. This is a very interesting book. It's a selection of poems by Pablo Neruda. And the editor always pairs each poem with a section from Pablo Neruda's memoirs, which serves to illustrate the poem or even explain it in some cases. And on a second level of commentary, the editor himself then comments on the section from Neruda's memoirs. This is a lovely introduction into Neruda's work, I think, for everybody who wants to know a bit more than to just read the poems. And I think it can be read very well in small installments over breakfast or dinner. So that's it for this book haul. In the future, I am going to include ebooks in these hauls. However, I'd like to do a What's on my Kindle video first before I start including them. And anyhow, most of the ebooks that I've bought in recent weeks and months I've already read, so you are going to hear about them in an upcoming wrap-up anyway. So that's it for May. A good mixture of famous and of obscure books, I think. If you have read any of them, I'd love to hear what you thought about them in the comments. Bye!